Hi there, my name is Amanda Newell, and this is the Mammalogy final exam. First thing I'm going to talk about is the human-wildlife complex in India presentation. Um, Something I found most interesting about this presentation, of the 245 carnivorous mammal species in India, um, India has of the 245 carnivorous mammal species in the world, India has 55 of them. So that's 23% of the world's carnivore species. That's not necessarily density of carnivores, but just presence of the species living in the most populated country in the world. I really enjoyed the segment on the leopards in urban areas. Leopards are able to adapt very well to a lot of different environments. They are found in urban areas quite often. So something that was noticed in 2002, there was an uptick of leopard sightings in this small town in India. Um, People were calling into the government quite often. So the government began to relocate the leopards anywhere from 220 miles to 250 miles away. Um, Leopards get very disoriented when they're taken out of their home range. They moved over 29 leopards out of this small town in about a year. Um, it was later discovered that once these leopards were moved, they didn't know how to hunt, they didn't know how to find food. Um, they started lashing out, and there were actually a good number of human conflicts with these relocated leopards, a lot of attacks. Um, Leopards began to be microchipped, and researchers were able to definitively pin that these relocated leopards were becoming more aggressive towards people. So since then, there's been a policy change that leopards um, aren't typically relocated anymore to mitigate that aggression. Next, I'm going to talk about a primate species. I'm going to talk about the ring-tailed lemur since I already do have a pretty good understanding of the species. Um, they are a black and gray color. Um, they have white bellies, white faces, a very triangular looking face, and a black nose. They have 13 alternating rings of black and white down their tails, giving them their name. They weigh around 6 pounds and are about 2 feet in length. Males and females are very similar in morphology. They typically live between 10 to 20 years. Captive lemurs have been shown to live much longer in captivity. With their diet, they are omnivorous, so they mainly live on leaves, flowers, and insects. They have been known to eat fruit and other small vertebrates, though. So ring-tailed lemurs live in a very large social group. They have a complex social structure. They use a lot of um, unique signals to communicate within this group. They use auditory signals, olfactory signals, um, and then also something unique about these groups is they're dominated by the female. So it's more of a matriarchal system. The ring-tailed lemur specifically is found in the southern portion of Madagascar. Their habitat has decreased quite a lot within the last 20 years or so. Um, they are found in dry forests, spiny brush, mangroves, rocky outcrops. Um, so just right in this general area here, but again, this area has shrunk quite a bit in the last 20 years. For conservation status, they are endangered. They have a decreasing population trend. They moved from vulnerable to near threatened in 2008 and then endangered in 2014. They're hunted for bushmeat, the illegal pet trade, and then they also have a lot of habitat loss happening at the moment. Um, Madagascar is one of the poorest regions in the world, so there's been a lot of exploitation of the forests and the wildlife that lives within those forests, and unfortunately lemurs kind of get caught in that. So there needs to be conservation efforts that link both economics and social norms with the conservation of um, species on the island in order for human and wildlife populations to live cohesively. Here are some citations for that information. Next, I'm going to talk about noise pollution in oceans. Um, Marine mammals, or just marine animals in general, rely on sound for survival. They use sound to find food, to navigate, to communicate. Um, once you get to a certain depth in the water, there is not much light, so sound is a huge factor. Many human activities are adding noise to the oceans and disrupting the behaviors of sea creatures. Um, this noise is caused by all sorts of vessels, large, small, vessels using sonar, things like that. So the first group I'm going to talk about is more of the baleen whales that you'll see. These began to be studied in the 1980s. They want to take a look at bowhead whales and small vessels at high speed. When they studied these whales, they saw that the whales generally moved away. They interfered with foraging, socializing, and play behavior, and they also spent less time at the surface when there were these small vessels around. Gray whales also increased their vocalization rate um, and rate and level when there were ships around. So humpback whales are prone to noise exposure from tourism. They increase their vocalizations with the increase in ambient noise. They also vocalize less frequently when there are ships around. Sorry, I've got a double bullet point there. Right whales actually showed no response to ship noise. So this lack of response is concerning because this species does have a high strike rate in ships. And right whales are very much a threatened species at the moment, so we want to keep their numbers as high as possible. The next group I'm going to talk about is the toothed whale, the toothed whales. So in the 1980s, the researchers wanted to look at the response of beluga whales to icebreaker ships, very large commercial ships. They found when the icebreakers were in the area, the belugas lost pod integrity. They had rapid movements. They had shallow dives. They changed their vocal behavior. They also looked at narwhals that were in this area. They changed locomotion and fell silent. So there's definitely an influence on these animals. So they also found in more recent studies that beaked whales had a reduction in foraging efficiency when there were boats around. Dolphins increased their sound production, so this causes a metabolic rate increase. This will require more energy. So they also have to move at a greater speed to avoid vessels or leave the area where the vessels are found. All of these activities together will culminate into a very noticeable energy expenditure. One area that hasn't been studied as much, but they have begun to look at, are river dolphins. In the Ganges, there have been mixed responses to vessels. Some change directions, prolong dive time. Some are attracted to the boat, as well as there not being any result or any change in behavior at all towards these boats. Porpoises may be more vulnerable to this type of disturbance due to their small size and low fat reserves. Um, so this could reduce foraging opportunities, which results in negative fitness. Next group we're going to look at is your manatees and your dugongs. Um, the research on these groups of animals kind of came about in the 1970s when there were a lot of fatal collisions with these animals. So there was kind of curiosity of why weren't they moving out of the way. So there's a current hypothesis on why they don't move is that they spend a great deal of time at the surface of the water, and due to a mirror effect, they don't hear much towards the bow of the ship. So this combined with the manatee's slow movement leaves them vulnerable to vessel strikes. But some behavioral studies have concluded that manatees are able to detect and respond to approaching boats. They often change orientation, they change depth, they change their diving behavior, just their general behavior, and their swim speed when boats are near. And then the final group I'm going to talk about is the pinnipeds. So these are your seals, sea lions, walrus. So much of the research examining